Hey you guys, welcome to A Safe Place to Land. This is Olivia and I am so glad to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about maybe one of my favorite things to talk about because it is something that I have personally dealt with and struggled with and has been something that I've had to continually recognize in my life, and that is codependency. So today we're going to kind of talk big picture, right? Again, I'm not a doctor, don't take this to the grave or whatever, but we're going to be talking kind of like high level view, and maybe in some subsequent episodes we'll get into like the nitty gritties and the specificity of certain things. But we're going to talk about how do you identify if you are a codependent person or that you might have codependency patterns in your relationships. So first off, what is codependency? At a very basic level, codependency is the enmeshment or the interconnectedness with another human being that is unhealthy and sometimes can be quite detrimental and toxic. And so it's really this sense that I don't have a sense of self. I'm not kind of my own person, that I am too dependent, connected, overly connected to another individual. So codependency is interesting because it came about, I believe it was Melody Beattie who kind of brought this language 70s and 80s in the context of addiction work. And so for a long time, a lot of the 80s and 90s, codependency was very much synonymous with Alcoholics Anonymous, addiction work, and those types of things. And then probably in the last, 20-ish years, 15, 20 years, it's become more of a topic around relationships, or seen as relationship addiction, some people say, and less synonymous with AA or addiction like alcohol or drugs, but seeing it more so in everyday people, not just regulated to this subset of folks. And so that's kind of, where kind of codependency originally kind of stemmed from. And what we know now is codependency isn't just, the enabler and the addict, so to say, right? That it is, much more broad than that. So some behaviors to notice. If you may think that, hey, I think I might have some codependency or codependency tendencies. You care more about others than yourself. You don't recognize your own needs or wants, your boundaries, and you're the yes person. Now, there's a whole lot more, and these are just some behaviors that kind of first came to mind. The biggest thing though is that you are kind of inseparable with someone else, meaning you don't really have a life outside of that one person. Typically, you don't have a lot of other friends. You're not cultivating depth in relationships outside of that one person. Whether this could be romantically, this could be platonically in friendships. I see it more so within female friendships than I do in male friendships. But certainly, it doesn't mean that similar eating disorders or disordered eating tends to be more present in females than it is in males. But is that just because we're not diagnosing it or seeing it within men because of the bias that we have? Maybe. But certainly this can also be very present in couples, romantic relationships, those types of things. The biggest behavior piece to notice is, can I do life outside of that one person? Like, are you developing friendships, right, with other people in kind of your local kind of context or your community? Or do you not like doing anything without that other person? Do you consult that other person for every single little thing? That you are more about their needs and their wants and focus on them than you are about yourself. Now, at first blush, a lot of people, when I first bring this up, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm a very connected person to myself. I know what I need, I know what I want, and all those types of things. I'm like, okay, cool. When was the last time you said no to something because you're tired or you just can't make it work or whatever the situation is? And they're like, well, I wanted to do those things though, so I said yes. Did you actually want to do those things? Or did you feel like you had to do those things, or wanted, in quotes, to do those things because it's kind of a backdoor way of you getting affirmation and validation that, like, I'm a good friend, I'm a great wife, I'm a good person? And a lot of times it can be so insidious. But the reasons why we say yes sometimes are not because it's like an overflow of my heart and that I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that for you, or let me buy this, or let me go and sacrifice my own sense of time or whatever to go do that thing for you. It's almost like this compulsion that we have that if I don't do that thing, will there be a break in the relationship? I have to maintain this steady connection, which is where that kind of anxious attachment kind of stuff, right, kind of plays in here. This is where codependency has a lot of attachment type of things kind of all and around it. So behaviorally, those are things to notice, but then what's happening on the inside, right? So the behaviors are helpful in terms of noticing like the externalization of things, like the functions that I'm doing outside of my person, my body. But what's actually happening on the inside for that person? They don't know who they are apart from the connection to someone else. They define themselves by I'm so-and-so's mom, you know? I'm so-and-so's wife, or I'm so-and-so's best friend. That they are not a whole person in who they are, but they are made whole, in air quotes, when connected to that other person. Maybe they feel unrest when they're alone, that they don't like it, because then that means they actually have to notice what's going on within them, and I mean, that they definitely don't want to do that. They dislike or don't do things solo or by themselves because it makes them feel uncomfortable. Again, this sense that I need to be around that other person at all times. I need them around in order to make me feel good, in order to make me feel okay, in order to make me feel safe. And they like to be needed, and they need to be needed. I remember when I was kind of in the middle of my very first and probably the most intense codependent friendship that I had in college. I remember starting to do therapy and it coming up, this sense of like a savior kind of complex. Now, it doesn't always happen this way where, you know, one person is kind of under functioning, whether they have a mental health issue or, you know, they have an addiction of some kind or something like that. It doesn't always happen that way. But in this particular situation for me, within this friendship, this person that I was best friends with very much struggled, had, you know, a pretty traumatic past, abuse, disordered eating, self-harm. I mean, just had a lot of struggles, but also high needs. And I felt like I could be of use because at that time I was able to be present. I was able to have long phone conversations. I was able to walk to her dorm. I was able to be the best friend, to bring her food, to do these things or whatever it might be, and to never say no. In the middle of my therapy experience, initially, I remember that kind of being called out, where Steve, my therapist at the time, was like, what does that do for you? Because it feels like you need to be needed and you need to be the hero in someone else's story. And when I heard that, I was like, that's interesting. Again, kind of keeping it at arm's distance, like I'm not gonna let that thought get too close because that's gonna like wreck me. But because it was like shots fired, I had to do something with that. And over time, eventually it came out where I was just being suffocated for multiple other reasons in the friendship, and there was a natural separation at summertime, and I was like, I can't do this. And she went into like a rehab facility for her disordered eating. And that's when I came back to school that next fall, and she was in her kind of rehab situation, they had strict rules and boundaries around, you know, who she could talk to. And I was on the no list. And I remember when I was told that on the phone, I immediately felt a sense of shame. And like I was like 10 years old. And I called back multiple times just to be told no. Almost in the sense of like the self-inflicting, you know, kind of punishment to myself. But it was in those moments where I was like, wow, that compulsion and that need and desire to be connected to that person was so big. And now I can see, you know, however many years removed, 15 years removed, it was more than likely because I did not want to tend to what was happening in my own heart. Because I knew that meant I was going to have to walk away. I knew that meant that this relationship, this friendship could no longer be. That it was crushing me and killing me, and also was the thing that I cared about the most. And if I didn't have that, then I would have to pay attention to myself. And that sucks. I don't want to do that, you know? And so if you notice these behaviors, these kind of external pieces and some of these internal pieces, by are no means exhaustive. These are just like top of mind. And they resonate because, you know, there's pieces of this within my own story, right? And so how do you fix it? You know, that's what a lot of people like come to me and they're like, okay, so how do I solve this problem? Olivia, like, enlighten me, you know? And it's not like a fix, right? Where, you know, you take a pill and you feel better and you're done with it. I think that is probably the biggest misconception, right? It's similar to like an addiction in the sense of it's not a one and done, it's a continual daily process, and knowing and paying attention to and tuning into yourself and what's coming up for you, because you're not meant to be friends with every single person. Not every single person is good for you to be friends with. There are certain types of people that you probably should not be friends with if you recognize that you have these type of tendencies or patterns or behaviors, internal struggles in the context of a relationship to other people, that you're not meant to be friends with every single person. And not everyone is going to be good for you. Not because they're bad, but because they're not good for you. In you wanting to grow and break free of these kind of toxic and unhealthy relational patterns. So, knowing that you can't fix it, how do we begin to cultivate an awareness and not repeating the same patterns in every single friendship? Because I remember like when I walked away and in the continual act of walking away from that friendship that took a lot longer than 6 months, there's this belief and struggle that I was just really bad at making friends, that I was just really bad at being a friend. And I think that was probably one of the most insidious lies that kept me feeling really fearful and ashamed and almost like hiding myself from relationships with other people. And it was really some of my roommates at the time who helped me to see that it wasn't that I was bad at being a friend, bad at making friends, or bad at cultivating deep friendships that were healthy. It was that I had this relational struggle and pattern, and I could either choose to notice it and to be mindful of that and to be curious about it and to be on the watch for it in the future, or to wallow in it and to allow it to define me and all my future experiences that I would then go into. And so I think one of the first things in cultivating that awareness is curiosity. If you can't be curious about the health of any of your relationships, you're like, that one's fine, no, don't touch that one, that might be an indication that something's up. Not that like you're codependent, like this A plus B kind of thing, but like curiosity. What could that mean? Why are you holding on to that so tightly? Why are you not allowing that to go under the microscope? What about that feels terrifying and risky? So curiosity, and then some level of separation. So if you're married, this could simply just mean you need to develop some activities and doing some things on your own. Maybe just as simple as like go for a walk around the block by yourself. Maybe go out on lady dates without your significant other. Maybe it means turning down the frequency of how often you see that friend to the exclusion of everyone else. Are you developing other friends within your community and even outside your community, right? Like do you have hobbies, skills, or things that you like to do, and can you do those with other people? Another big one is tuning into yourself, or being more kind of in your body. And that comes with knowing what you're feeling and what you need and what you want, desires, all that kind of good stuff. It's leaving your brain and getting more into your body, being embodied. And so that's a big one, because a lot of times with codependency, we want to be focused on everyone else. I want to see everyone else but me, because that's, again, how I find that sense of affirmation and validation and approval in other people looking back at me and be like, wow, you're such an amazing friend. Wow, you're always there. Wow, you're so helpful. You're so kind. You're so this, you're so that. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Thanks. Again, it's not conscious most of the time. You're not being a manipulative little whatever, but it's the underwriting current of what you're actually needing without tuning into your sense of self. And like, what does Olivia need? What does Olivia want? What does Olivia feel like she can do? What boundaries, right? That's a big one. It's like, are there any boundaries? Are you boundaryless? Every relationship, even married relationships, have to have some level of boundaries around what feels comfortable, what doesn't feel comfortable, where you're willing to show up, where you're not willing to show up, and those types of things. Because all of this is wanting to work towards healthy interdependency, right? If you're watching the video version of this, it is the healthy interdependency as opposed to enmeshment, where it's like a ball of yarn, but the healthy interdependency where I'm looking at this other person and I'm leaning on them appropriately, but I'm not becoming the other person. Like if the other person has a poop day, I don't automatically have a poop day. Like if it's my spouse is having a hard time, be like, man, I hate that you're having a hard time, but that doesn't mean that I am taking on all of those feelings or all of those emotions. We want to work towards healthy interdependency, and it has to start with self-awareness and curiosity. And so again, if there's relationships, when you're thinking about this, as you're listening to me talk, there's certain relationships you're like, yeah, we can talk about these ones, but not that. Why can't we talk about that? What feels threatening or scary? Because not every relationship means that you need to walk away from it. But how can we tend to you and what's coming up for you, and how you can be more in your body? Because that's going to mean that you're going to be more present, you're going to be more available, you're going to be more emotionally in tune with yourself and what you can give to others, which really just means you're honoring who you actually are and how you're showing up in relationships and being honest. Instead of people pleasing and I have to's, I need to's, right? It's like this compelling force of like, and you get crazy and I gotta go do the thing, instead of like, this would be a good thing to do. I would like to do that thing, but it's not the only thing that I have to do. now or never, and there's gonna be a lost relationship if I don't do the thing. I know this is a lot and it can feel really overwhelming and really heavy, but if you find that some of these patterns and some of these behaviors are present for you, I'm happy to say that you are not broken, that you will not stay like this for forever unless you want to, that you are capable of having healthy and meaningful, deep, abiding, and rich relationships. That this does not define you. This is not like the banner over you or a scarlet letter that you have to wear, like, I have codependency, and like, watch out, folks. But for you to recognize that's not all of who you are. It is a pattern that you have had. How can we be mindful? How can we be aware? How can we tend to ourselves, our own kind of garden, if you will, instead of not looking at our garden and wanting to go hop around into everyone else's and only live and exist in those other spaces? How do we come home to ourselves to tend to the things that we need to tend to? It's possible. You just have to be willing and have to be curious. If you have found this episode to be helpful, I would love for you to share it on all the things. Send it to a friend that you're like, hey, this is really helpful for me. I would love, to talk about it. This can be a great discussion starter. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to A Safe Place to Land podcast, I would personally love it if you did, because it helps other people find us and it helps get the word out about how do we cultivate meaningful and healthy relationships and how do we ultimately create a life that is meaningful. So until next time, I'll catch you later. Be kind and we'll talk soon.